I think the big aha moment collectively for a lot of non-coders like me was a tool called Claude Artifacts, where you could just say, generate a landing page in React and TypeScript, which is a coding language, and it will just like create it on the side window and you could actually see it. I'm like, oh my God, like for the first time I'm seeing something that I wanted to create being created in code right there and being rendered.
I don't sort of, fanboy when I have guests on, but this is the first time, I've seen so much of your stuff on TikTok about 2 years ago. I was living in Toronto. I was sort of like, couldn't find anything interesting on TikTok. And you were like one of the most interesting, fascinating accounts that I was following at that point. I think I started following you on TikTok when you had maybe 20 or 30,000 followers. And I just checked in, you're past 500,000, which is incredible. You got a couple 100,000 followers on Instagram. And I think unlike a lot of other AI creators who are just talking about what's happening, sharing news and so on, like you actually are a builder and you're doing a lot of awesome stuff and you're building apps and you're sharing very cool knowledge with everyone. And before I dive into any more questions and kickstart the podcast, is there anything I've left out? Is there anything else that the audience should know about you?
Yeah, I don't try to I guess since I've started creating content, I've become less about branding and marketing and more just about like doing things that I think are really cool. And I have really gotten into this coding with AI because as you know, I'm sure we'll talk about it today with tools like Cursor, like Replit, and just with how good Claude is getting, we can now just build software. And so I feel like I really mastered the art of creating short form content. And now I'm trying to also be able to build apps and build prototypes for apps so that my team and we can build things for a community on like a really fast loop, like as fast as we can create content. It's like a learn in public instead of like build in public, which is my new motto.
That makes a lot of sense. I have a quote from you here, and I've heard you say this at multiple points, but I think what you said was the type of person that's going to be successful 2025 and beyond is the type of person who's going to be a composer creator. Is that correct? And can you explain that a little bit to the audience? I'm sure they'd love to hear what that means.
I think that there's starving creators. The starving creators are ones who know how to get attention but don't have a business model. And the starving builders are people who know how to build stuff but don't know how to get attention around the things that they build. And usually, and of course, if I'm a content creator and I know how to get attention, which is how I started, if I were to outsource someone else to build an app, that's not like a really tight team. If I don't know what's going on, I think the disconnect between what you're building and how you talk about it with your audience, there's going to be this gap there. It won't feel authentic. But if you can actually build and like talk about what you build as you build it, I think that is going to be the next multi-million-dollar opportunity for content creators, is to actually build things specifically for their workflows that their audience resonates with. And I think the most powerful people on earth are the people who like can use AI to speed up a lot of their content workflow and use AI to speed up a lot of the building workflow. And I'm against AI automated content. I think it just sucks. But I think there's a lot of things you can automate prior to that. And I think the same thing is happening on building. So yeah, I definitely think they're going to be dangerous, the creator composers.
Interesting. Which one do you think is lacking more at this point? Do you feel like there's too many content creators who don't know how to build, or do you feel like there's too many builders who don't know how to create content?
It's hard to say. If you are like, maybe you're 18, 19, you're just entering the workforce and you're like, I don't necessarily want to do a normal job, and you had to pick one, all else equal, I would likely pick content, just because I think that there's ways to make money within content that isn't just selling a product. You can also be an influencer. You can do sponsorships, brand deals, start newsletters. You can do all these different things. Whereas if you're building a product, you mostly have to sell that product to make money unless you want a job building someone else's software. And so I think that there's a lot of people who are really talented builders who cannot figure out how to tell a story about their product in a compelling way. And it's sad.
Yeah. I think coding is something that is obviously hard. Like, you look at 5 lines of code, and if you never coded before, it looks very intimidating. So it's obviously hard. But I think creating content is deceptively hard. I think you look at folks on social media on a video, and you watch that video or you read that Twitter post or something, and you're like, I could do that as well. But it's not that simple. And I think just because it's so unobviously difficult makes it so valuable, in my opinion.
Yes, I definitely think sometimes I forget how much of what I do is second nature now at this point, because when I first started making content, right before you started following me, I was mostly in like marketing analytics, and I was kind of studying creators, and that was kind of part of my job before, was to like bring in influencers. And so I kind of learned the tactics. But when I first started making content, it was awkward. Like the first 20 videos are super awkward, but you hit this point where you treat the camera like another person, and you can just become yourself. And the internet has a funny way of allowing you to be someone else. And once you've become like super confident in it, you can just rely on that skill. And like all my best videos on Twitter and YouTube recently are literally vertical videos that I take with my phone, and I'm just building stuff, and people are like, oh my God, I can build that. I think that's another big thing about content, is you have to ride the edges of like what's possible and because if you are talking about something that many people have talked about for a very long time, there's already an existing niche that exists for that, and there's a lot of competition. And B, AI is very good at explaining things that's just in their training data. So you have to compete with AI. But if you keep pushing the edge, and like you do a great job of this, talking about new things that are impactful to people, there's a lot less competition.
Yeah, agreed. That's where I stand on AI and automating content in general, just because I don't think AI can create content that just doesn't exist in the world right now. Like, it can't create content about ideas that aren't out in the world right now. Maybe it will at some point, but at this point, I just don't think that's possible.
That's the first problem that we're solving with the app that we're building. And I'm really passionate about, I don't think there's any good apps for ideating and giving an app proper context to your worldview so that you can create content from that worldview. And I think that is a very interesting problem to solve. And I think it's solvable. I just don't think anyone is approaching it the right way.
Since we're on the question, do you want to share a little bit about this app that you're building?
So the app is going to be called yapthread.com. The first version is going to be similar to other apps that are out, but I think our app is going to be better for a few reasons that I can't share yet.
Fair enough.
But it's basically going to be an app that will allow you to clip things from the internet. And so, like, I don't know if you use web clipping, or like you have a place where you save all of your things to a location. This app will allow you to just immediately save things, whether it's on your browser, whether you're on your phone, and you can actually say why you think it's interesting. And we're going to create this massive database of all these things. And it's going to be like a lot like My Mind, if you've ever used that. But then also you're going to be able to record. You're going to be able to go outside and just record your ideas and thoughts. And we're going to build custom presets so you can basically create an outline or a draft. And then eventually we're going to build in AI, it's going to be like a buddy that can talk you through your content and ask you the right questions. Because I think the biggest thing about creating content, I think the answer isn't in like what you put into it. You need to be prompted to put good things into it. And that's how you learn, is you get asked the right questions that yield a good output. And that's the direction that we're going to try and solve it.
Yeah, I think you've picked the right angle here, because when you started, I thought you were going to say, just like start off with the video side of things and YouTube. But I think the ideation part and getting it down on paper, I think writing is where all creation begins. Like, even if you're creating a video, podcast, anything else, like we prepped for this podcast, I took notes, I watched your podcast, I looked at your Twitter, I looked at your TikTok, I wrote these ideas, I clarified my thinking, and then I came into this sort of like, have a conversation with you. So I think writing is basically where all creation starts. And if you can nail that first 5-10% of writing and really get your ideas in, I think that makes a huge difference.
Like, if you think about what any video is or any newsletter, it's usually a thread of ideas. And so I think the key is to encourage people to get all their threads out there, because ultimately the quality of your content is going to be based on like the strength of your ideas. Like, you want to get your core ideas. And I think people have so many ideas inside them that they just don't know how to get out. And so I think the answer is just to like have an AI ask you questions and like force it out of you. And then eventually, once you have these ideas out there, you can create threads, which is why we're calling it Yap Thread. Because you can just speak your ideas at any time, and then you can create that structure around it, which is why I'm really passionate about that concept. It's like organizing your thoughts, that going from unstructured to structured.
I 100% agree with you. I think just nailing that first 5-10% around capturing the idea and structuring it in the right way for it to be a compelling idea down the line when you finally create the content, by far the most valuable part of the process, in my opinion.
Totally.
I want to switch the conversation a little bit. I've been following your content for a long time. You've shared a lot of interesting things. I've seen it all the way from, you just sharing basic stuff about ChatGPT, which wasn't so basic back in the day. And now, you're perhaps on your most interesting arc, which is, you're creating a lot of apps with Cursor and Replit. For folks who are, tuning in, might not have heard of Cursor or Replit or what's going on with like the true no-code AI revolution. Do you want to just, speak to a little bit about what's going on there and why it's so exciting?
So I think the best way to explain this whole movement that I call composing. Cursor has a feature called Composer, and I kind of hijacked that name, and I created a community called the Software Composers, and it's growing like so fast because so many people who couldn't code before are now able to make at least prototypes for apps with just natural language. I think the big aha moment collectively for a lot of non-coders like me was a tool called Claude Artifacts. So Claude is just like ChatGPT, and there was a feature called Artifacts where you could just say, generate a landing page in React and TypeScript, which is a coding language, and it will just like create it on the side window, and you could actually see it. And that was a huge aha moment for me. I'm like, oh my God, like for the first time I'm seeing something that I wanted to create being created in code right there and being rendered. And then Amar Reshi from 11 Labs, I watched one of his videos where he took the code from an artifact and just pasted it into Replit, which is a website that allows you to deploy these apps. And I was like, oh my God, I need to learn what that is. And then I did that. I basically took a landing page from artifacts, pasted it in Replit, and then I deployed it to the internet and added my own custom domain. And then all I did was ask Claude. I don't even think people really need me to teach them things. Like, I think that AI is so good at teaching me things that like I just let my curiosities go crazy. And I was just asking Claude, I'm like, okay, I have this web app in Replit. I want to make this a website, but I want other people to be able to log in. And they're like, okay, you should use Google Firebase. And then it taught me how to hook up Firebase. It was like 3 hours worth of errors like on the way to setting this up. But eventually I figured it out. And then I created this web app that other people could sign in with their Google account. And then from there, I ended up meeting Anj. He's been really helping me with coding without knowing how to code. And from there, we've just like, we just had to start a company, and we're going to build stuff because I'm obsessed with it now. And it seems like a great time to get into it.
No, this is amazing, Riley. It seems like you just let your curiosity run crazy, and like one thing has led to another, and like that has had a compounding effect. And I think that's in tech, like the compounding effect sometimes is just amazing to see, and like how that runs.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I would encourage anyone who's in your audience who's like anyone who wants to create content. I feel there's a lot of value in being rigorous with schedules. And I think a lot of people who are in the newsletter game, it requires a certain level of discipline. But I think there's also the other side to this where the less you think about strategy and the more you think about letting your curiosities run, it actually has this weird effect that makes your content more interesting and like more engaging. It feels almost like a vlog. And people are watching me learn in real time, and I'm teaching other people based on what I learn in real time. I'm really hyped about that like type of creator who just goes out and explores and talks about what they learn.
So Riley, I think like maybe for the audience, like, did you had a technical background? Did you do any coding before this? Or this was your first time entering this space? So like, I think it really sets the bar for individuals as well and inspires them.
So I have never written a line of code. If you had a gun to my head right now and told me to build a hello world thing, I don't know if I could do it still. But if you gave me AI, I could build like a pretty compelling Notion clone with 3 days. If I had 3 days to just like hack away and build I could build a pretty complex app. And so, yeah, you do not need to know how to write code. I've always followed my curiosities. Just every time you code with AI, take your code, plug it into Claude, or you can just do it directly in Cursor. Ask questions about the code and ask about the functions and just ask what the functions do. And eventually you have this like weird mental model in your head as you're coding without coding. And every time I do it with AI, as long as I'm asking questions and don't turn my brain off, the mental model gets stronger and I'm able to understand how it works. The same way that we're all content creators, but I have no idea how Wi-Fi works, right? And so like I feel like it's the same thing.
So Riley, you have built like, a lot of mobile web apps. Just curious to know like which ones have you found to be easier than the other, like doing this composer stack you have created around yourself. If you can share a bit more about that.
So landing pages are getting lightning fast. Like I'm about to release 2 YouTube videos within the next week about like how you can create like really cool landing pages. You can screenshot other landing pages that you like and immediately create them, deploy them with your own domain. And if you use Google Firebase, you can easily basically create an admin dashboard. So you can actually edit it directly on the web app instead of having to like go in and edit it from the code level. So that's the easiest. I would start out with a landing page. What gets really hard is when you have when you're filling multiple tables with a database. So like let's say I'm building an app like Notion where you can create tables, but then you're also building within that same app something like Trello. Like you have to really pay attention to like how the data is being stored, or else Cursor is going to get confused when coding it, and it's not going to understand the relationship between the two. And so be very careful with the features you want to add. I would start off with just a few features, make sure it's stored properly in like a list or just a simple data table. And if you're using Firebase, just make sure that you're selective over the features you add and focus on bringing a simple app all the way to production before you try and like branch off and create something like super grandiose, because it's going to seem cool as you're doing it. And then when it's time to deploy it, you're in for a 10-hour rude awakening when you're trying to debug this with AI. It's possible, but it's not easy. But what I've been doing, I've been doing this for 10 hours a day, every day. And so it's not easy by any means.
I have a question actually around like deployment and production, right? So obviously like for enterprises, you need the AI to be reliable, predictable, secure. With all these different tools you're using, what's your perspective on building enterprise level products? Like, is the AI ready yet, or like you think there's like some gaps on the production deployment side?
I mean, I definitely don't think it's there for casual users to build full enterprise apps and deploy them and be confident in like the security of your app. By no means. I think that there's a tremendous opportunity right now. Like I said earlier, there's a lot of starving developers who are looking for side projects, who want to build stuff. I think that right now we're in like the prototyping era, where the app that we're building right now, it's going to take 2 weeks to build in full, probably. But I created a full prototype web app that just had the raw features. I didn't care about design. It just had all the features that I wanted to include. I built it in like 7 hours. I think the era we're in is you can build a full compelling prototype for an app with these tools. And so I use Replit to deploy. Replit makes web apps very easy to deploy. And I've been able to finish apps that I use internally.
No, that's super helpful, because I think as enterprises, and I think like the word you use, prototyping era, right? Like a lot of enterprise folks we talk to have said the same thing. There's a lot of experimentation, there's a lot of prototyping, but there's this gap still which they face from an application perspective.
Yeah, and it's nice to be able to go to a developer and be like, I want this. I want these features that you can use. Let's go through it together. How long will it take? And I remember getting quotes from developers before when I was thinking about building apps when I was just a content creator. And they'd be like, oh yeah, we could get that done in 3 to 4 months. It'll cost you 40 grand. And then it's like, why? Like, tell me why. Let's break this down line by line. And so now I feel like I'm in a great position where I kind of know what it takes to get an app to deployment, especially as I've built a team. And so the iteration loop, I'm super passionate about that. And then building a community, Greg Eisenberg talks about this a lot, where you build your community and then you build apps for your community. I can just do a live stream right now and get a couple, like 400, 500 people on the live stream, and I can build an app live with them, be like, hey, would this be useful? Would this be useful? And so it's just like real-time testing.
So you built a really large audience. You have built like this amazing community across different platforms. What's your experience been like with each of these different platforms you have leveraged?
Yeah, I love Twitter. I love Twitter. Twitter's the only place where I feel like it's real conversation. So I just want to share my love on Twitter because I feel like anyone who has genuine interest in stuff is like very excited to post videos, and then people like under the videos be like, no, that's a terrible way to do it. You should do it like this. So like 95% of the things that I learn are me going through Twitter. And like I said, clipping. I screenshot and save it to an app called My Mind. And I just save all of these things. And then I'll go back and look at all of these interesting things I find on Twitter, things that people are building. And I'll be like, all right, I want to try that. And then that's how I ended up getting into the coding thing. And so from a consuming standpoint, I would consume way more on Twitter than Instagram and TikTok, which is funny because those are my biggest platforms. But I still make content on there because, like it's part of the game. And it's just hard to get people on Instagram and TikTok off the platform and into a more authentic conversation. So I will say I wish I spent more time on Twitter since I started, because I just like the amount of inbound emails and opportunities have all come from Twitter. I just think that that's where all the builders are. TikTok and Instagram is great for explosive growth. It's great for driving people to use software, which will be useful once I build software.
I'm exactly the same. Like most of my audience is on newsletter and on LinkedIn, but I spend most of my time on Twitter because the amount of insight on that platform and the amount of like interesting people you get to meet there is incredible. Like the best opportunities in my life have come from Twitter DMs, if I'm going to be honest, right?
I 100% agree that Twitter has a way of people cluster around interesting conversations, whereas YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok, they cluster around content creators. One thing that I'm interested in, problem I'm interested in solving, I definitely see the value in Instagram and TikTok. Like, my life completely changed because of Instagram and TikTok. And I think it can, as a builder, if you can communicate on Instagram and TikTok, you can make millions and millions of dollars. Like, no doubt about it. I want to make, one of my biggest passions is like making content easier for builders. Like people who build things, like I want to make it easy and obvious to you, like how you should share your ideas on video platforms. If you just take what you're building and if it's sort of interesting on Twitter and dumb it down and learn how to turn it into a story that addresses real consumer pain points, you can get millions of views on TikTok and Instagram, which will lead to millions of downloads. And so that's what I hope my app will help builders share their story for their things that they're building.
So tell me a little bit about, let's just say I was going to start creating content on YouTube and TikTok and Instagram today. What advice do you have for someone like me who has, maybe 1,000 followers or is just starting out?
I feel like right now we're seeing this massive saturation in AI generated news content. And to me, it's just super uninspiring, lame stuff that I just block all day. I really think that leaning into authenticity and wanting to learn and making sure that that thing that you want to learn is going to be valuable to a lot of people down the line, I think that would be the best way to get started. In terms of creating content, I think that there's a lot of BS advice out there that talks about like what camera you should use, what software you should use. I think it's generally nonsense.
Doesn't matter at all. Yeah.
It doesn't matter at all. The middle of the pack content creators, I've noticed, focus a ton on tools And the middle of the pack developers focused a ton on tools where they're like, I only use this coding language. And then the really good content creators, doesn't matter. They know how to tell a good story. They have good instincts. They have repetition. They test things out. They're fast. They have good systems set up in place to make good content. And then like the good developers, like they don't care. It's like you see levels.io, or he's just like, I just use the thing that works for me. It's fine. So yeah, I'm noticing that as a trend. It's just like people who are very outcome driven. So like start with the outcome, work your way back. Tools don't matter.
Agreed. And I get a lot of people who reach out to me and they're, how do I start an AI newsletter, or how do I start creating about content about AI? And what I just tell them is like, to be honest, it's probably over at this point, just because there's so many creators in this niche. It's so scaled up. I say, my advice always is go create shit about something new that isn't on anyone's radar yet, but you feel confident in your bones is going to be on everyone's radar pretty soon, right? The reality is, I think AI is going to be a multi-decade trend. I don't think anyone's going to lose interest over the next decade, but I think the general public is going to lose a little bit of tech interest just because folks just want something new. The reason why a lot of people want to do AI content is because they see it popping on socials, and I think that's the wrong framework. A lot of this, for you, I know for a fact, for me as well, just came from the fact that we were genuinely curious.
Yeah, I mean, you have to play the game. You don't get to decide how the world is and then also be an entrepreneur and do your own thing, right? Like, you have to play the game, and you have to look at what other people are doing that's successful, and you need to realize that if you don't want, like if it doesn't feel authentic to you, that's why I actually don't like the word authenticity. I think there's a difference between following your curiosity and like being authentic. Because most people are like, I want to create content, but like this type of content doesn't feel authentic to me. I usually just say, screw that. Like literally pull that, get rid of that idea that it needs to feel authentic to you, and realize that like you might not have been able to taste enough things to know what's authentic and what's not authentic to you. The algorithm has a way of discovery that if what you're creating is good, people will find it, and you'll actually find your tribe. I had 210,000 followers on TikTok before anyone that I knew I was making content. And by then they were like, oh, it's cool, he has a lot of followers. And so I was able to skip that process that I've seen hundreds of people have reached out to me since I started making content. And they're like, I can't do it. Like there's this like pain of judgment. And they don't want to be seen as like a failure. And so I think that you might be able to like discover a new version of yourself if you make content, because you might find people that value a different part of your personality than people you know in real life. And I think that part's actually cool. So I say screw authenticity and just be cringe. It's gonna hurt. And if it hurts, you're doing something right. Just don't hurt other people.
Yeah, agreed. So writing or recording great content is one piece of it, but let's be honest, distribution, growth hacks matter a lot, right? At some point you rode a certain wave across certain platforms. I rode multiple waves. So Threads was like, the first way that I got to 500,000 followers there. Then on LinkedIn, I was the first person who figured out how carousels work a couple of weeks after they launched the feature, and I rode that wave. Then, had a couple of other minor growth hacks for those waves all the way now have close to 1 million on LinkedIn. I'd love to hear a little bit about, what are some of the growth hacks that you've ridden so far, the waves that you've ridden so far? What are some distribution strategies you'd recommend for them?
Yeah. Okay. So if you're making a TikTok or Instagram video, you want to start off with not only a hook, but a visual hook. So there needs to be something that shows something happening that could relate to them. And so if you're starting in a TikTok video, and the best way to do it is find something interesting on the internet, which is what I was doing at the beginning to growth hack, I guess. I would find things on Twitter, and I would provide unique, unfiltered commentary about it. So you have me, and then above me, you have the whatever video I'm talking about. And I will say, this new AI app, and so you got to say AI because AI is trending. This new AI app is going to turn you into Einstein or whatever the change is. And so you want to lead. People don't care about the technology. They care about whatever the value proposition is, or like however it can make their life better. You don't want to look at what outcome is the most technically impressive. You don't want to look at what outcome is the coolest to you. You want to find the outcome that has the biggest universal theme. There's a TikToker, his name is Chris Clayfin. He's actually one of my friends. He's like 2 million followers, maybe more on TikTok. And he talks a lot about universal themes, where all the posts that go viral aren't the coolest thing. It's something that introduces some universal theme that like all humans can relate to. And so that's what I think a lot of my most popular videos with 10 million plus views on Instagram or TikTok have been about this universal theme. So you want a really strong hook with a visual, and you want to find, like, it's very tedious and annoying work. Like, you have to find the part of the video that is the most engaging. And basically, like, you set expectations with that universal hook, and you want to make sure that you live up to that expectation that you set. And then at the end, ask people to follow you.
So Riley, like to wrap up, like, you obviously are doing a lot of different things. You're experimenting with different tools on the AI side, different social media platforms as well. And things are kind of significantly growing, compounding, which is amazing to see. Love to kind of like know from your perspective, right? Like, where do you see your journey going over the next 6 to 12 months, as well as what are your predictions for this space, which is rapidly changing, right? Like, so just love to get your perspective on that.
Trends. I'll start off with the trends where I think this is going. I think real-time voice is so slept on in terms of use cases. I do not think a general chatbot that can talk about anything is that useful. I think when you get something that looks like the GPT-4 advanced mode in a narrow context, everything changes. The level, the amount of features you'll be able to add into apps will be able to go up because it's not going to be a intimidating input fields from the user's perspective. They're just going to talk to a chatbot and things are going to happen. That's kind of the way that I think about it. And I think there's so much of software that we could do just by talking, by yapping, which is why I'm obsessed with the word yap. I think it's a popular trend right now, is yapping amongst like a younger audience. And I think that there's so much that we could do. I think we could go on a walk in the morning and answer our emails just by speaking, because these AI models are going to get better at understanding our voice. And so that's one thing that I'm really passionate about. And then obviously, like, the coding, like, I don't even have to say it. I'm very passionate about coding. So those are the two things. Like, I think it's going to get significantly easier for people to interact with software with voice, and then also easier to just use voice potentially to just build apps in real time. And maybe those will kind of merge together.
Riley, this was probably the best conversation that I've had on this podcast so far. So I appreciate you making the time, and I hope we can get to do this again.
Yeah, dude, just hit me up. If I'm not building, I'm always down to chat and talk about trends.
Thank you so much, Riley, for jamming with us.
That's it for today. Thanks for joining us, and please subscribe so you don't miss another episode. Take care. Bye-bye.